I'm Dave Champion. As you know, a lot of jurisdictions, states, counties, cities across the country have instituted laws that people must wear face masks. And many businesses now are saying, if you don't wear a face mask, you cannot come in shop. The most notable one probably being Costco, with businesses saying, you can't shop here without a mask. And government saying we can fine you or we can arrest you if you're not wearing a mask out in public. It's time to ask the question, does this make any sense? Now, millions of Americans have opinions about this. And what I'm here to do today is to discuss the science of it. So instead of having an opinion, we could all have an informed opinion. Let's check it out. Let me begin by saying I'm going to give you the numbers from these studies using the exact measurement system that they used in the study, whether it's nanometers or microns. Don't worry, because I'm also going to tell you the size of a coronavirus in nanometers or microns, depending on the study, so that you have some reference. Let's now quickly move through the science. The seminal, most authoritative piece of research on wearing masks in an infectious disease circumstance was recently published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, the published date April 6, 2020. And so let's quickly take a look at what that study told us. I'm going to be referring to my notes so that I get all the facts correct for you, and I don't want to leave anything out as well. Okay, so this was done in South Korea, which, as you probably know, has been setting the standards moving forward. I mean, they've done some tremendous work since the COVID-19 outbreak. And this study was conducted by 14 researchers, 11 of them medical doctors and 3 of them PhDs. 14 is important because in a lot of these studies over the last, 10, 15, 20 years, you get a couple of guys working together and they basically decide on what the premise is before they ever start. So they make sure that the conclusion matches their initial premise. So when you have 14 researchers, that's a lot less likely, and it gives the research a lot more credibility. When you look at the entry-level information on any study, the first thing you come to is the abstract, then you get into the methodologies, and then you get into other technical details, followed by something usually referred to as discussion. The discussion is exactly what the word would imply. It's just a general discussion, and then you'll get into more specifics later. In the discussion section, we find this: neither surgical nor cotton masks effectively filtered SARS-CoV-2. Okay. The coronavirus we're all familiar with that we're dealing with now. Okay, let me repeat the language. Neither surgical nor cotton masks effectively filtered this particular coronavirus. So then we get into a summary portion that's more of a formal summary. And it says, in conclusion, both surgical and cotton masks seem to be ineffective in preventing the dissemination of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay? Ineffective. This is, again, the most cutting-edge research on the subject. The masks are ineffective. In the medical field, the gold standard for these kind of masks is called an N95. And part of the title, the 95 part, is that an N95 mask will block 95% of the particles that are 0.3 microns in size. That's pretty small, except that this particular coronavirus is 0.125. So the mask blocks 0.3, but the coronavirus is 1/3 as small as that. So the coronavirus passes right through the N95 mask. The next piece of information we have comes from the Center for Infectious Disease and Policy at the University of Minnesota in another recently released study. And it says these words: sweeping mask recommendations, as many have proposed, will not reduce SARS-CoV-2, the current coronavirus, transmission, as evidenced by the widespread practice of wearing such masks in the Hubei province, China, before and during its mass COVID-19 transmission experience earlier this year. In other words, like everywhere else, originally only a few people were infected. So everybody there started wearing masks. And then they had a mass infection experience, even though everybody was wearing a mask. So it continues. Our review of relevant studies indicates that cloth masks will be ineffective at preventing SARS-CoV-2 transmission, whether worn as source control or as PPE. Okay, now I think everybody's aware what PPE these days is, but source control means, okay, so we've decided you're infected. You're now a source from which people can become infected, so that they mean putting the mask on somebody who we believe has been infected. So they're saying that these masks are ineffective when placed on somebody who actually has the infection, insofar as preventing other people to get it. It's ineffective. In this same study, speaking specifically of cloth masks, they said, there is no evidence to support their use by the public or healthcare workers to control the emission of particles from the wearer. In other words, you put a cloth mask on and particulates come out, whatever orifice, particulates come out, they're going to go through a cloth mask. Here's an interesting observation concerning surgical masks. You ready? Clinical trials in the surgery theater have found no difference in wound infection rates with or without surgical masks. Despite these findings, it has been difficult for surgeons to give up a long-standing practice. And this, there is no evidence that surgical masks worn by healthcare workers are effective at limiting the emissions of small particles or in preventing contamination of wounds during surgery. Most people are now aware of the Spanish flu, typically referred to in the U.S. as the Spanish flu of 1918. In the wake of the Spanish flu, W.H. Kellogg, a medical researcher, decided he was going to look into why masks worn during that infection episode had seemingly zero effect on the transmission of the Spanish flu. Kellogg's findings stated that the number of cloth layers needed to achieve acceptable efficiency made them difficult to breathe through and caused leakage around the mask. So you see people wearing the bandanas, okay, or they've got some sort of a cotton thing around their neck and so no. Here was an interesting thing that Kellogg, I read his report from 1919 or 1920. It's been PDF'd and I read it and it was long and tedious, but I was amazed in 1918, 1919, whenever he was doing that research. I was amazed at how thorough and detailed his research was. It was like, wow, way back then, we're talking 100 years ago, still pretty spot on stuff. So anyway, here was one of the interesting observations he made that's probably more sociological than it is medical. And that was, he said, because California passed a law requiring anybody who went out in public to wear a mask, that what they found was people would be wearing these cotton masks, which was pretty much all there was back then. They'd be wearing, we'll call them fibrous masks, could be any particular kind of fiber. They're wearing these fibrous masks all day long. They're hot, they're miserable, you don't breathe well in them. So what they would do is they would get home and they would immediately take them off and they wouldn't put them on again unless they went outside. Well, what infectious disease experts have known pretty much forever and was just substantiated again with this particular coronavirus like 3 weeks ago in a study that was released, 4 out of 5 infections occur in the home. So what Kellogg was saying was you make people wear this stuff all day long out in the environment where they're considerably less likely to contract it or to cause someone else to contract it. And then they get home where the odds are 80% that they're going to give it to somebody else or someone's going to give it to them, and they take the masks off. Okay, now, it wouldn't have mattered back in the Spanish flu time because the cotton mask didn't work, and it doesn't really matter now because whether it's an N95, whether it's somebody wearing a bandana or wearing some sort of paper mask, it's no more effective now than it was back then. But Dave, what about all the articles I see telling me that wearing masks help? Okay, so first of all, we just heard the science of it. Okay, These are the two seminals, the ones out of the University of Minnesota and the one out of South Korea. They are the seminal, most respected, most authoritative pieces of research on the subject, and you just heard that there's no benefit to wearing a mask. So when you see these articles, what are they all about? Well, it's funny because when I was doing the research for this video, I came across a link to an article in Wired magazine. Okay, Wired magazine. They talk about like emerging technologies and how electronics technology will or may benefit your life. They have nothing to do with medicine, nothing to do with biology, nothing to do with physiology. And yet this article was entitled something like, "It's time we admit that masks work." Okay, and you heard the data, they don't. In a couple of the articles that I looked at where they were saying masks work, they reference a study, and the study says masks work. But here's the problem. In that study, they were looking at masks being effective to stop particles that were 300 nanometers or larger in size, 300 nanometers or larger. That was the context of the study. However, a coronavirus, the one we're talking about right now, is 125 nanometers. So it is a third the size of the particles they were considering in this study that is cited in these articles as supporting the wearing of masks. What happens is these writers, I don't know, maybe it's clickbait, maybe they're just irresponsible, maybe they're too stupid to read the actual research themselves, but they throw out these articles telling you, yeah, where are the masks work. If I were to summarize that study from the point of view of the people who conducted it, yeah, we didn't even look at anything as small as a coronavirus. And in order to keep this video brief and not have it string on like so many of mine do, I'm not even going to get into the separate issue of face piece leakage, which is a whole other issue. So with all this evidence, like right there, right? There it is. The most recent, most authoritative, seminal studies on the subject. So with all that available, why are governments doing this? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons that the governments are doing it. Number one, government has this thing, and I despise it. And what governments say is, oh, look at that, something's going on. We have to do something. Even if it's worthless, even if it's meaningless, even if it's counterproductive or insane, we must do something. We're government. Okay? No, that's not a factual paradigm. As a matter of fact, most cases, the correct step for the government is to stay the hell out of it. Then there is the obedience factor, which I think plays a huge role in this particular COVID-19 episode. I think governments are really flexing their obedience muscle. They are looking to see to what extent they can gain and maintain the control of the masses, because virtually all of their data has been bad and virtually everything they've done has been wrong. And at this point, this long into the process, all their original data was wrong, all their decisions were bad, and yet they're staying on the same path. There's got to be a reason for that, and I'm presuming it's they want to test exactly how long people will remain obedient to utter incomplete nonsense. The next reason is perhaps just plain old simple stupidity. Have you ever actually sat down and talked, like had a real conversation about something meritorious, meaningful, with an elected official? I have. They're not particularly intelligent people. They're great at manipulating people. That's how they got into office. But they're not particularly bright. And if they happen to know you personally and they know that you have a very high intellect, the flow of information almost comes to a stop. They don't want to say too much because they don't want to get called out on their ignorance. But yet they're still the ones calling the shots from their ignorance, right? Furthermore, and I think this goes back to we have to do something, is politicians, elected officials, they know the public are morons. I've shared this story before, I'm going to share it again, being illustrative of the fact that they know the public is a bunch of morons. Dennis Hoff, the brothel owner, who ran for an assembly seat here in Nevada, and he ran twice, and most people weren't aware of that. He ran, I don't know, call it 3 years ago, as what he really was, which is a libertarian. And so he ran on sort of the independent libertarian platform. He believed in freedom and economic freedom and social freedom and so forth, right? Very, very libertarian platform, because that's who Dennis really was. By the way, I knew him personally. So that's who Dennis really was. Dennis, when he ran as a libertarian, he lost by a wide margin. Okay? So then, looking ahead 2 years, he hooked up with Roger Stone, a name you're almost certainly familiar with. And Roger Stone said, well, of course you lost. Look at how you presented yourself to the public as a libertarian. Nobody's going to vote for a libertarian. Americans, they may parrot the words about liberty, but they're not really into it. I mean, they say the words, and that's as far as it goes. So you need to say something that's going to get them to vote for you. So Roger Stone created a political persona for Dennis, and then, which I think is best exemplified by how he began referring to himself, Pahrump being the largest town in this county, in Nye County. He started referring to himself as the Trump of Pahrump. Was he a Trumpian? No, he was full-blown libertarian. But he knew, being himself, being legit, being genuine, he was never going to get elected. So Roger Stone constructed this persona for him. And he won the election, I forget now, I think it was something by 83%, even though he had passed away 3 weeks before Election Day. Okay. Now, imagine he had not passed away and he had won the election, and there he is sitting up in Carson City in the Nevada Assembly as an assemblyman, knowing that by speaking what he believed to be best for America, which is the principles of liberty, he could not get elected. If he created a false persona, then he could get their votes. So would he not be sitting there, having won, thinking, God, these people are absolute morons. They couldn't even remember 24 months earlier when I was running as my real self. So why are businesses, corporations like Costco, saying, if you don't have a mask, you can't come into our business? Well, okay, I think there's a public perception. As long as the public falsely believes masks serve some beneficial purpose, I imagine corporations are going to require masks because from their point of view, it signals to their customer base, we care about you. See what measures we're taking? Don't worry about the fact that they're completely worthless and you're going to get infected anyway. That's not the important part. The important part is that you feel really good about us. Okay, that's part of it. The other part is lemmings. Okay, just because somebody is VP of customer service or a president of finance or a CEO of a big corporation doesn't mean that they're in many ways not just go along to get along lemmings. As a matter of fact, I would say in the corporate world is where you find the most lemmings because they have to fit into the corporate mold. People like me, I mean, I did it for some years, but yeah, no. You have to have, either you're cutting your own course, somebody like Elon Musk, or, and this is probably 99.9% of the people in corporate America, and I don't mean, the clerk typist or the telephone operator. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the executive level. They've got to be lemmings, because they have to fit in or they don't fit in and they don't get promotions and they don't keep their jobs. So the people who are making decisions at these corporations, they may be great at, for instance, Costco, at merchandising in a big warehouse environment, but outside of that, they're just unintelligent lemmings. So the bottom line is science. Actual research testing these products tells us N95 masks, they will not stop coronavirus. Standard old paper masks, not even close. Putting some cotton over your face, no, not even. So they're, in other words, that's pretty much the three kinds of masks, right? They got the very, very highest level disposable mask, the N95. Then you've got the standard cheap-ass paper ones, and then you've got people putting bandanas on their face. That's pretty much it. There's no fourth mask that I'm aware of, unless you want to go to the full face things with the breathing apparatus, and that's a whole other discussion. But the ones that 99.9% of the population may put on their faces because government demands it, or they want to be a joiner, they want to look like they care. Whatever their motivation is, it's absolutely worthless, meaningless, and it doesn't stop the infection from coming in, and it won't stop the infection from coming out. So says science. Thank you for being here. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.